So there's quite a few dance trends happening on TikTok right now. One is How Do You Want It with Tupac, which is great. And another dance trend is Chris Brown's Loyal. And it's amazing because you see a lot of fathers and daughters of working, or mothers and daughters making these videos together. Shout out to the Gen Xers. Like I remember, I remember my family went to some wedding back in the 90s. And my mom was dressed really nice, right? She had on a leather skirt and all that stuff. She looked great. Well, this is when dancehall reggae was out. So we had like Shabba Ranks, Don Penn, No No No, Telephone Love, JC Lodge, Murder She Wrote, Shaka Demons and Pliers, like all the greats, right? So I think they was playing Shabba Ranks, and my mom started doing the butterfly dance. I was like, oh no, stop! What are you doing? Flash forward today, if my mom and I were in the same situation, I'm like, hold on, let me grab my camera so I can get my likes up. I need my mama to help me with my numbers so I can get monetized. It's totally different now with parents and their millennial and Gen Z kids. It's a fascinating space to be in 2024. So, like I mentioned before, Chris Brown's Loyal is part of this. And this brings me to Billboard's 21st Century Greatest Pop Stars. And I made my video that's on YouTube. People kept on asking the question, where's Chris Brown? And I said, yeah, if we're looking at this scientifically, and if that list was called the greatest music artists of the 21st century, he definitely should have been on that list. But they protected themselves by saying pop music artists. Because if they had just the greatest music artists of the 21st century, which they should have done, Chris Brown had to be on that list. Even if it was like number 25, he had to be. Chris Brown is probably one of the most prolific artists of the past 15 years on the hip-hop and R&B charts. I think currently he retired Lil Wayne and moved ahead Lil Wayne. He's second all time on the mainstream hip-hop and R&B lists when it comes to number ones. Like Chris Brown has been a prolific artist on the hip-hop and R&B side. And a lot of these tracks should have been played on pop music, but the incident with him and Rihanna is still in people's minds. And when that happened, pop radio basically banned Chris Brown. They didn't say they banned him, but they basically banned Chris Brown on their charts. But they'll never admit to that. It's almost feels like how Will Smith slapped Chris Rock and the Oscars put a 10-year ban on him, which I think will probably change in a few years. But I think quietly pop radio just decided not to play Chris Brown. To his credit, and after that, he kept on getting in trouble for stuff. To his credit, over the past few years, he seemed to have calmed down. It seems like once he became a father, he's really calmed down a lot. He's matured a lot. I think he's like 34 to 30. He's in his mid-30s right now. So he's matured a lot, but pop radio still treats him the same. So no. So yeah, technically he probably should have been on that list if it was like the greatest music artist of the 21st century, but because they said pop, they protected themselves because he wasn't on the pop charts as much. But it's interesting that the song is called Loyal because Chris Brown has a very loyal fan base. Even after all the Rihanna stuff, even after all the incidents that came after that, when he had that fight with Drake and all these other incidences, his fans stuck with him through thick and thin. And the biggest part of that is when you see the meet and greets, where he was this past year, where he had these meet and greets, where he charged a little bit over like $1,000 to meet and greet with him. And I think they did it on 36 concert dates. And I think it was only for 20 people in each city. And there was not a shortage of women. And I'm sure there's a guy someplace in there, but mostly it's women. And there was not a shortage of women who are willing to pay over $1,000 to have their picture taken with Chris Brown. And these weren't and there's some pictures that's very nice, but some pictures was very suggestive on the women's side. So much so that some dudes broke up with their girl because they were all had their legs wrapped around Chris Brown. It's the craziest thing. Like my mom loved Eddie Levert from the OJs, but I'm sure she would have been happy if she had a picture with Eddie LeVert, but I don't think she would have had her legs wrapped around Eddie LeVert back in the day. It's like, man, it's a different time. But yeah, like these women were willing to pay over $1,000, willing to risk their relationships, having their picture taken with Chris Brown. They know Chris Brown's past. Even currently, like Chris Brown said on Kai Cenat's podcast that he has multiple girlfriends. So he's basically saying like, no, I'm not monogamous. I'm not going to be locked down by anybody. I'm paraphrasing what he said. They know that he's a single guy, that he has multiple women. They know the things that's happened in his past. But they're still loyal. They still like him. Even in Africa, like he has, I don't know if he's had it or not, but he had a couple of sold out shows in African stadiums. I don't care who you are. If you can sell out a stadium, that's an amazing thing. And again, the media's the same way, where that's a big story, right? But today's show's never going to have it. GMA is never going to have it. They're not going to talk about Chris Brown that way because they're still stuck on the Rihanna incident. And I totally understand it. But at a certain point, you have to realize that, he has matured and he hasn't had any more incidences like that. And again, I'm not trying to defend him at all. Like what he did was bad, but luckily we haven't heard any more of these incidences. But again, the media would never, Entertainment Tonight would never talk about the fact that he's selling out African stadiums. That's a big time thing. So how do you feel about Chris Brown? Especially if you're a fan. What was it about you that kept you being a fan, even after all the stuff he's done? The only criticism I have of him of late, and it's not his fault, it's that when people try to compare him to Michael Jackson, it's like, listen, I get it, right? He is, in a lot of ways, the Michael Jackson of this era. Like how Usher Raymond was probably the Michael Jackson of his era. Chris Brown is probably the Michael Jackson of his era. But when you're trying to tell me that he is just like Michael Jackson, or like Tank was saying that he's better than Michael Jackson, or on par with Michael Jackson, I can't do that, man. Like I can't. Yes, Chris Brown is always in the studio. Yes, Chris Brown has made a ton of music, but sometimes I think Chris Brown makes too much music, where it's like, you don't have to release every track. Like the thing that made Thriller great was like, Thriller was like 9 songs. You don't have to release, you have to release like 20 songs or 30 songs. Like sometimes these songs are left on the hard drive. You don't have to put everything out. And vocally, Chris is a fine vocalist, but Michael Jackson was peak Michael at 12. He was peak Michael at 19. He was peak Michael at 23. The tone in Michael Jackson's voice is undeniable. Like there's nobody vocally currently that even comes close to Mike. Even if you look at Usher, and Usher's a really good vocalist, he doesn't have Mike's skills. And even when dancing, Chris Brown is an amazing dancer. But the fluidity of Michael Jackson's moves is just... Because it's urban dance meets Bob Fosse. It's basically James Brown meets Bob Fosse meets popping and locking. It's an amazing thing. He's Fred Astaire from Gary, Indiana. Michael Jackson's just simply amazing. Not to take away anything from Chris Brown, because he's an amazing performer, and that's why his concerts are so well received. Like he's an amazing performer. He is simply amazing. I kind of draw the line when they say that he's just like Michael Jackson. I can't do that. But if you're saying that he's the Michael Jackson of his era, I'll go along with that. But if you're saying that he's MJ, I can't do that. So, once again, if you're a fan of Chris Brown, tell me what's your favorite song by Chris Brown, what's your favorite album by Chris Brown? What do you think about what I just said about pop radio basically blackballed Chris Brown? Due to the Rihanna incident, how you feel about that? And if you are making videos with your parents on TikTok, what's that discussion like? He's like, hey dad, like I really need you to do this dance. Hey ma, let's make this video. Like how does that work? Since I kind of embarrassed my mom back in the 90s. I'm sorry, mom, I didn't know. We didn't have TikTok back then.